Hello everyone, welcome back to today's story. In this episode, we join James, Diep, and little Nye as they stand beneath a sky filled with fireworks, welcoming the arrival of the new year 2026 together. What begins as a simple family outing slowly turns into a deeply emotional night, one filled with quiet reflections, unspoken gratitude, and gentle hope for what lies ahead. Amid the cheers of the crowd and the glow of the city lights, Diep finds herself letting go of the weight she has carried for so long. Stay with us until the end to feel the warmth of a new beginning, born not from grand promises, but from small, honest moments shared as a family. And don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Your support truly means the world to us. The final afternoon of the year slowly melts into early evening, and the sky above the city begins its quiet transformation. Pale blue gives way to warm shades of orange, then slowly deepens into violet, as if the day itself is preparing to say goodbye. A gentle breeze drifts along the riverside, carrying with it the mixed scents of street food, cold air, and something faintly electric. Anticipation. Tonight doesn't feel like an ordinary night. It feels like a pause between what has been and what is about to begin. James stands near the railing by the river, one arm securely holding little Nye, while the other rests casually against the cool metal. Nye is wrapped tightly in her winter jacket, her small body warm against his chest. Her eyes are wide and curious, darting from the glowing street lights to the reflections dancing on the water below. Every sound seems new to her. The laughter, the music, the distant pops of test fireworks echoing somewhere far away. Beside them, Diep adjusts her scarf and takes a slow breath, letting the cold air fill her lungs. She watches the crowd flowing past, families holding hands, couples leaning into each other, groups of friends taking photos and laughing loudly. Everyone seems to be moving with purpose, drawn toward the same moment, the same countdown. Diep feels slightly overwhelmed, but not in a bad way. It's the kind of overwhelming that reminds her she's alive, that she's here. "I didn't expect so many people," Diep says softly, her voice almost swallowed by the noise around them. James glances at her and smiles. New Year's Eve brings everyone out. It's like no one wants to be alone tonight. Diep nods, understanding that more deeply than she wants to admit. For a brief second, she looks down at her hands, then back up at the city lights. A year ago, the thought of standing in a crowd like this would have terrified her. Too many memories. Too much noise in her head, and yet, tonight, she feels grounded. Nye suddenly lifts her hand and points excitedly toward the sky. A small burst of white light flashes in the distance, followed by another. "Daddy, light!" she exclaims, her voice bright and clear. James chuckles and shifts her slightly higher in his arms. "Yes, sweetheart. Fireworks are warming up." Diep laughs quietly at Nye's excitement, her heart softening instantly. She watches the way James instinctively steadies Nye, how his voice lowers when he speaks to her, how patient and present he is. There's no hesitation in him anymore, no doubt, just quiet confidence and care. They begin walking slowly along the riverside path, finding a spot where the view opens wide and the crowd thins just enough to breathe. Music from nearby speakers floats through the air. Familiar melodies mixed with upbeat rhythms meant to energize the night. Diep walks a little closer to James, her shoulder brushing against his arm. It's a small gesture, almost unconscious, but it brings her comfort. "Are you feeling okay?" James asks, noticing her slight pause. "I am," Diep replies honestly, "just taking everything in." James nods. "It's a lot, but it's good, right?" "Yes," she says with a small smile. "It's good." They stop near a low wall, facing the river. James leans back slightly, giving his arms a break while still holding Nye securely. Nye continues staring at the sky, her excitement unwavering, as if she's afraid to miss even a second. Diep rests her hands on the wall and looks out at the water. The reflections of the lights shimmer and ripple, stretching and breaking apart, then coming back together. It reminds her of the past year, how things fell apart, shifted, and slowly found a new shape. "I didn't think I'd be here tonight," Diep says suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. James turns to her, attentive. "What do you mean?" She hesitates, then continues. "I mean, this year felt endless. There were days I couldn't even imagine the next week, let alone the next year." James doesn't interrupt. He just listens. "But now," she adds, glancing at Nye, then back at him, "I feel like maybe I survived for a reason." James's expression softens. "You did more than survive, Diep." She lets out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing. "Thank you for bringing us here tonight." He looks surprised. "You don't have to thank me." "I do," she insists gently, "for making tonight feel safe, for making it feel normal." James smiles faintly. "I wanted Nye to have a memory like this, and I wanted you to have one too." Diep's eyes glisten, but she quickly looks away, focusing on the river. She doesn't trust her voice right now. As the sky darkens completely, the lights along the river glow brighter, and the crowd grows thicker. People begin checking their phones, murmuring excitedly as the countdown approaches. Vendors shout cheerfully, selling snacks and glowing toys. Somewhere behind them, a group of teenagers starts chanting, already practicing the countdown. 10 minutes, James says, glancing at the large digital screen across the river. Nye wiggles in his arms. "Soon?" she asks again, her patience wearing thin. "Very soon," James laughs. Diep reaches out and gently smooths Nye's hair. "Are you excited?" Nye nods enthusiastically. "Very excited." Diep smiles, then grows quiet again, lost in thought. The past year passes through her mind in fragments, not sharp enough to hurt, but still vivid. There were moments of fear, moments of doubt, moments when she questioned every decision she'd made. But standing here now, those memories feel distant, like echoes fading into the night. "Do you have any wishes for the new year?" James asks after a while. Diep considers the question carefully. "I used to wish for big things," she says slowly. "Success, change, answers. And now?" he asks. "Now I just want peace," she replies. "Health and time. Time to build something real." James nods thoughtfully. "Those are the best wishes." She looks at him. "What about you?" James glances down at Nye, who is now humming softly to herself, then back up at the sky. "I want us to keep moving forward, even if it's slow, even if it's not perfect. Diep feels something tighten in her chest, in a good way. I want that too. The final minute arrives. The crowd begins counting down together, voices overlapping, excitement swelling like a tide. 10. Nai claps her hands, laughing at the noise. 9. Diep instinctively reaches for James's hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. 8. James leans closer to her. Whatever next year brings, he says quietly. We face it together. She nods, her throat too tight to speak. 7. 6. The sky seems to hold its breath. 5. Nye squeals, bouncing in James's arms. 4. 3. Diep closes her eyes for a brief second, silently letting go of everything she doesn't want to carry anymore. 2. 1. The night erupts. Fireworks explode overhead, filling the sky with brilliant bursts of red, gold, blue, and white. The sound rolls across the river, powerful and overwhelming, as reflections shimmer wildly on the water below. Cheers erupt from every direction. Happy New Year! People shout, laughing, hugging, crying. James lifts Nye higher. Happy New Year, my little girl. Nee laughs uncontrollably. So pretty, so big. Diep looks up, tears streaming freely now, illuminated by the flashes of light above. Each firework feels like a release, a farewell to everything heavy they've endured. James squeezes her hand gently. Are you okay? She nods, smiling through tears. I am. I really am. As the fireworks continue to light up the sky, Diep leans into James's shoulder, allowing herself to fully be here, fully present. For the first time in a long time, the future doesn't feel frightening. It feels open. The sky gradually returns to its quiet darkness as the final fireworks fade into distant echoes. Thin trails of smoke drift slowly above the river, dissolving into the cold night air. Around them, the crowd begins to loosen, the tight circle of excitement opening into scattered movements. Some people linger, still buzzing with energy, phones raised to capture the last glowing embers in the sky. Others start heading home, hands tucked into pockets, voices softer now, as if afraid to break the fragile calm of the first minutes of the new year. James gently lowers Nye in his arms, adjusting his grip so her head rests more comfortably against his shoulder. The excitement that once had her bouncing has melted into a peaceful drowsiness. Her breathing is slow and steady, her cheek warm against his jacket. Someone didn't last very long, James whispers with a quiet smile. Nye hums faintly, half asleep. Happy, she murmurs again, the word drifting out like a sigh. Diep watches the two of them, her heart tightening in a way that feels both tender and overwhelming. There's something deeply grounding about this moment, about seeing Nye safe and calm, about seeing James so natural in this role. It reminds Diep that joy doesn't always arrive in dramatic bursts like fireworks. Sometimes it settles quietly, wraps itself around you, and stays. They don't rush to leave. Instead, they stand there a while longer, letting the night slowly shift around them. The river reflects the city lights in long, wavering lines, no longer interrupted by sudden flashes. The water looks calmer now, almost meditative. Diep pulls her coat closer, feeling the cold finally creep in. It feels different now, she says softly. James glances at her. After midnight? She nods. Yeah, like the world slowed down all of a sudden. He smiles faintly. Maybe it's just us slowing down. That thought lingers with her as they begin walking away from the river. Their pace is unhurried, unplanned. They let the crowd guide them for a bit, then naturally drift toward quieter streets. Confetti crunches under their shoes, small reminders of celebration scattered everywhere. A group of strangers laughs loudly somewhere behind them, still riding the high of the night, while another couple walks past in comfortable silence. As they walk, Diep finds herself thinking about the past year, not in sharp fragments, but in long, muted waves. There were moments when everything felt heavy, when the future seemed like something she wasn't allowed to imagine. She remembers nights spent lying awake, questioning every decision, wondering if peace was something meant for other people. And now, here she is. "James," she says quietly, breaking the silence. "I don't want this year to feel like a test," she says after a moment. He looks at her, attentive. "A test?" "Yes," she continues. "Like I have to prove I'm strong enough, healed enough, deserving enough to move forward. I'm tired of that feeling." James considers her words carefully. "Then don't turn it into a test," he says gently. "Let it be a process." Diep lets out a slow breath she didn't realize she was holding. "A process sounds kinder." "It is," he replies. "Messy, slow, uncertain, but kinder." They stop at a small intersection, waiting for the light to change. The street is quieter here, the noise of celebration fading into the background. Diep watches the red light glow against the dark pavement and feels a strange sense of relief. "For a long time," she admits, "I thought if I stopped pushing myself, everything would fall apart." James nods. "I know that feeling. But tonight," she adds, glancing back toward the river, "I realized something. Even when I wasn't pushing, life kept moving." James smiles softly. "Sometimes it moves better that way." They continue walking and soon reach a small convenience store, its bright lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon. James pauses and looks at Diep. "Want something warm before we go home?" She hesitates for a second, then nods. "Tea would be nice." Inside, the store feels oddly peaceful. The shelves are neatly arranged, the radio playing quietly in the background. The cashier gives them a tired but friendly smile. James carefully shifts nigh so she doesn't wake, then picks up 2 cups of hot tea. Diep pays, her fingers brushing the counter as she thanks the cashier. Outside, they sit on a bench near the store. Steam rises from the cups, fogging the air between them. Diep wraps her hands around the warmth, letting it seep into her skin. "This reminds me of something," she says after a while. James raises an eyebrow. "What?" "Those quiet nights, when nothing exciting happens," she replies. "But you remember them anyway, because they made you feel safe." James nods slowly. "Those are the nights that stay with you." They sip their tea in comfortable silence. Diep listens to the distant sounds of the city settling down. Cars passing occasionally, doors closing, laughter growing farther away. The night feels softer now, like it's finally allowing everyone to rest. "Do you ever worry about the future?" Diep asks. James thinks for a moment. "I worry," he admits, "but not the way I used to." "How so?" I don't worry about everything at once anymore, he says. I just worry about the next step. She smiles faintly. That sounds manageable. It is, he agrees. After finishing their tea, they throw the cups away and continue walking. The streets are noticeably quieter now. The excitement of midnight has faded, replaced by a gentle tiredness that settles into the city like a blanket. As they approach home, Nee stirs in James's arms. Her eyes flutter open, unfocused. Home? She murmurs. Yes, James whispers. We're almost there. Diep reaches out and gently holds Nye's small hand, her thumb brushing over tiny fingers. Did you like tonight? She asks softly. Nye nods sleepily. Fireworks. Pretty. Diep smiles, emotion swelling in her chest. They were. They arrive home just after midnight. The house greets them with warmth and familiar quiet. James carefully carries Nee inside and lays her down, tucking her in with gentle movements. Diep stands by the doorway, watching him, feeling a deep sense of calm wash over her.